South Korea has seen enormous change in the last century, moving at speed through seismic shifts. From colonization to military occupation to its current iteration as a democratic state. The state's cultural policy making has mirrored these shifts. Cultural policy in contemporary South Korea aims to be democratic, neoliberal, globalist, and state-driven, merging the patron state model with the historically rooted intrinsic instrumentalism. Culture making has assumed ideological, political, and economic roles, simultaneously justifying both state support and state control of the cultural sector. The South Korean Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism was formed in 2008. The official goals of the ministry are values-based, with a social and educational focus. However, there is evidence that implicit economic policy and desire for soft power is embedded within the South Korean government's promotion of culture. Other key institutions in the formation and implementation of cultural policy in South Korea include the Arts Council Korea, founded in 2005 following the creation of the Korea Culture and Arts Promotion Act. ARCO are not only the principal funders of the arts in South Korea, but they also hold a stake in cultural policy making and agenda setting. The Korean Culture and Information Service is an affiliated organisation of the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism and runs 32 Korean cultural centres in 27 countries. It exists to enhance the image of the Korean national brand by promoting Korean heritage and arts. 50 South Korean heritage sites or items are registered with UNESCO. In recent official tourism statistics, almost a quarter of respondents reported that historical and cultural sites are the main reason for them visiting South Korea. The tourism industry raised over $20 billion for the Korean government in 2019, with the estimated income predicted to almost double by 2028. The Korean Arts Management Service was founded in 2006 and is dedicated to the enhancement of the competitiveness of the Korean performing arts. Their objectives relate to international competitiveness, economic gain, and the importance of establishing South Korea as a leading force in the global market. Korea has been sparking international academic interest due to their ability to produce high-quality cultural commodities and use this soft power to advance political ideals, whilst also providing economic gain. Arts Council Korea and other organisations instrumental in distributing cultural policy push the notion that culture equips the people with a sense of cohesion, identity and belonging. Their tagline, "Sharing the Joy of Creativity," resonates with Dr. Hai Kai-young Lee's conclusion that culture transforms the nation's political and socio-economic conditions and shapes the ways of life and perspectives of its citizenry. The European Union has had a free trade agreement with South Korea, and since 2011, exports to the EU have increased exponentially. The EU's general trade with South Korea rose to €37.8 billion in 2012. The increase in EU imports of Korean cultural goods largely fueled by the popularity of the Korean wave. South Korea has devised and implemented an extensive infrastructure to support the creative industries at home and abroad. Korea Creative Content Agency is a government agency that manages and coordinates the promotion of the Korean content industry. Established in 2009, it integrated 5 organizations, including the Korean Broadcasting Institute, the Korea Culture and Content Agency, and the Korea Game Agency, with centers established in the USA, Europe, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the United Arab Emirates. The agency provides subsidies and loans for creative products according to global trends. The agency works closely with Korea Exim Bank, which provides financial support for export business from Korea. As culture is recognized as the 4th pillar of sustainable development, the KOKA Exim Bank partnership became the new Korean Wave engine house. This government agency created a new context for entrepreneurship and an international standard framework to promote the export of Korean creative content. Arts Council Korea also promotes the international exchange of the creative sector. Adapting to the international perspective, this state agency oversees grant schemes such as the International Arts Joint Fund. According to their 2009 annual report, Arts Council Korea provided support to the cultural sector to the tune of 51.2 million Korean won. It also promotes folk and indigenous art by providing incentives to source the skills and talents necessary for future creative productions. Grant programs established by the Ministry of Culture Culture and managed by the Korea Arts Management Service include the Fund for Korean Art Abroad, which promotes Korea's contemporary visual art to an international audience, and various visual, performing and publication support programs. Having identified the economic capital of the cultural industries in the early 1990s, South Korea chose to fundamentally change its perspective and approach to cultural policy, and through successive governments has implemented a range of regulative measures to reflect their needs and motivations. Cultural policy in Korea has been very tightly bound with cultural and political identity, and as such it has been deployed as a mechanism to rally and mobilise the agenda of successive governments. In an effort to mobilise anti-communist nationalist sentiment, President Park Geun-hye chose to draw a distinction between what she termed sound and unsound culture, implementing policy that supported the production of certain officially approved cultural products and services, whilst rejecting others. Her unofficial blacklist contained the names of more than 9,000 visual artists, musicians, actors, film and musical directors deemed critical of Ms. Park. A legacy from Korea's long history of cultural censorship, this political measure was a deliberately prohibitive one, seeking to control which voices were heard and how. The tension between economic potential and moral threat has been a continuing feature of cultural policy making in South Korea. An overview of state regulation of the television and film industry from the 1960s to current times serves as a useful microcosm of general cultural policy making through the decades. From observing a control model in the 1960s to a laissez-faire model to the promotion model introduced in 1999. Restrictions in this industry through the decades include limitations to the amount of airtime allocated to foreign television, the state control of indigenous film content and distribution, and the implementation of measures such as the Law of Cinema and the purification of the broadcast law. Since the 1990s, gradual deregulation, the prohibition of censorship, and the strategic establishment of supportive state agencies have combined to create an indigenous film and television industry with growing audiences both at home and abroad. South Korean culture is still tightly coupled with state agendas, cultural policy remaining intrinsically linked with state support and state control. Implicit and explicit economic policies, the strategic implementation of national and international support systems, the strong relationship between culture and political identity, combined with a soft power agenda, characterises the cultural policy approach adopted and implemented by successive governments in this state in modern times.